Hi, everybody. Today the article that I chose was this one from the State of Security: three emerging innovations in technology that will impact cybersecurity. And I chose this just because I was kind of curious as to not just what current security is, but what security will look like, and what future developments in security will have an impact on, I guess, current technology and where it's going. And at the beginning, it sort of talks about just the war between security experts and cyber bad people, cyber villains. I like that, cyber villains. And just how it's sort of the back and forth and what's being done. And it starts off covering hardware authentication, which I think we've mentioned a couple times in class. Just the idea that, especially pertinent to the network of things, having the ability to recognize and identify and, I guess, validate other hardware on your network and other devices on your network using the hardware rather than just sort of the basic username, password, whatever, Bluetooth pairing that isn't exactly the most secure. And one of the main pushes for this is actually coming from Intel and the processors. The other thing it covers is cloud technology, and I thought this was really interesting because in my mind, cloud technology has always just been for rich things like large-scale companies to save space, really, so they didn't have to host their own servers. But it's more than that. I realize the idea is having everything on the cloud and having someone else take care of it too. Looking through it, a lot of private and public entities have doubled up their security center. Woohoo! Right there. Using things like Firehose and Amazon, and I imagine Microsoft services are there too. And just the idea that when you keep it all on their servers, you don't have to worry about a physical presence yourself, and it's just generally physically more secure, even if it's not necessarily more secure virtually. And I thought that was interesting because it also covers how these virtualized systems aren't just virtualized like computers. It's a full environment that's been virtualized. We have the virtualized firewalls and other security systems that I thought was really interesting because I think it just shows how we're moving away from having all of my stuff be mine and instead just sort of renting a system from Amazon, which comes with everything already there. And the last thing was deep learning, and this was probably the thing I was most interested in learning about because in my mind deep learning is really nerdy and sciencey and something you don't really touch unless you're trying to do some sort of weird research project. And I realize reading through this that my opinion and perspective is entirely wrong. In the security field, deep learning is being used for behavior analytics and identifying anomalous behaviors, things that don't match with the norm. And by doing that, you don't have to have a human constantly monitoring everything. You can let the computers monitor themselves, and they can identify when a user isn't acting like the user normally is, which could be and just sort of use behavioral analytics like that to identify if someone might be an imposter, might have taken someone's credentials, because suddenly this user isn't doing what they normally do. They're not just looking at random financial spreadsheets. Suddenly our financial people are looking at databases, which is kind of funky. I just thought it was really interesting because it's getting to the point where it kind of feels like everything is going to be built in. And I think that's the approach that people are starting to take is the less I have to intervene and work on my own security, the more attractive it is to me as a client and a customer. And so if I can use a virtualized system with Amazon and then apply deep learning, then I don't really need someone managing anything physical because I have deep learning to identify impostering users and other anomalous data, and I have virtualized firewalls managed and addressed by Amazon. And that just leaves me to run just my business, and I don't have to worry about the other ends. I thought that was really interesting. So I think that's probably going to be one of the main impacts is this progression towards kind of a hands-off security. Build it, set it up, and let it do its thing to the best of its ability, which with deep learning can probably be a pretty decent, significant ability. The vocabulary word for the day is virtualized, specifically virtualized firewalls, because I know the idea of virtualized, and I wasn't quite sure how virtualized firewalls worked into that, so I looked it up. And a virtual firewall is just that. It's a firewall done on a virtual machine. Physical firewalls tend to be easier to manage because it's isolated network and it tends to protect a bit better. because it stops things before it even gets onto the network at all. Whereas a virtual firewall tends to be not quite as secure, but it's also less expensive and easier to set up and handle because you can address them all from a centralized location. There's no physical component, so you don't have to move anywhere. You can just handle everything from your control panel on your computer, which I suppose is just another risk because, someone got to my control panel. Woohoo! Alright, and yeah, that's it for today. Thanks, everyone.